All right, so let's get started for today. And essentially what we're opening up with is the Rhino user interface, right? Also known as the UI. And essentially the way that it works is a command-based program. So what you type in is essentially how it works, right? You type in a command, you press enter, suddenly the computer enacts that command, right? Very similar to AutoCAD. When you type in line, you get a series of commands to make a line, right? So for instance, just right off the bat, type in line. Of course, I can click and click to another side, and yes, I have a line, right? So it is a pretty intuitive program at first, right? And to be fair, it really is a simulation of reality. It comes from 1988 and was originally invented for jewelry design, right? Actually, what 3D printing was originally invented for was actually so that we can print things and mold those tiny little intricate details and holding diamonds and all kinds of gemstones. However, the reason we use it, especially in architecture, is because it's a very universal program. Unlike Blender, unlike Revit, unlike SketchUp, if you can work Rhino, you can almost jump into any other program and be safe, right? You can definitely swim, right, in that regard. However, you'll notice by default, we actually have what are called viewports, right? Which you'll see actually in the top left. It's called top view, right? If you've ever had AutoCAD, this is actually the view you've been constantly looking at, right? In AutoCAD, it's actually showing you a top view, right, of everything. If you double click on your viewport icon, it goes back to that 4 steps. Now, funny enough, each of you guys have 3 of those steps, or 3 of those sides, or 3 of those viewports, if you will, of an object. Funny enough, the screen is actually already displaying you this in real time. So for instance, if I type in box, enter, and I can even set coordinates such as 0, 0, being x-axis 0, y-axis 0. I can actually, and you'll see that it locks on to our origin point. I can even type in, well, eventually, I can make a box, right? Now, of course, by default, it's in kind of a 1980s video game wireframe mode. And that's definitely not the best way to look at a solid object. So one thing I can do to that viewport is, of course, click the down arrow and switch it to a shaded. I can even instantly switch it to a rendered view and get a kind of a realistic view of this object, right? So I'm going to make a few of them today and show you some of the steps that are relatively simple in actually making these items, right? And you'll notice that it instantly gives us the top view, the front view, and the right view. Again, kind of already what's being asked for. In our case, if you wanted to switch those, like maybe, oh man, I'd really want the front on this side, I want the left side on that side. Great. Well, if you click on that little down arrow, you'll see a ton of options. But in our case, we'll set the view, and we could set it to anything, right? We could set it to the bottom, the left, the right. And in our case, I could switch it back to the front, right? And maybe this side I actually want, I don't know, the left, right? Again, it doesn't really matter. I don't really want to change them today, but just in case you need to, it's definitely an option, right? We can definitely already change those views, and that's essentially what you're looking at here, right? You have the top view, the side view, and the front view. Right? Some of these you're actually asked to find the other view, right? And in some cases, some of these objects, I think they're pretty simple, right? Of course, you got to hold it up the right way. But in our case, I'm going to start off really with some simple ones. We can do, I don't know, which one you want to do first?
First one.
The first one? So this little awkward one?
Oh, I thought that was the first one.
Oh. Which one? Oh, this one?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So I'll look at it like this, and really I can just kind of tell on the object that, well, it's a rectangle. Are you guys doing this kind of like a 1-to-1?
Yes.
So like if we,
I'm going to apply a scale.
okay, fair enough. Well, I'll just kind of fake it till I make it today. Obviously you guys can put the units to it. But one of the first things we want to do in this program is actually establish the units. We could use light years, we could use parsecs, we can use meters, we can use just about any units there are. However, once you do that, you would type in units, enter. And of course it brings it up, right? And by default, usually this program is in millimeters, right? It is actually a UK based program. So often it is not empirical units. So in my case, for today, I'm going to use inches. We'll switch it to inches. We'll press apply. And of course down here in distance display, I want to use feet and inches, not necessarily decimal, right? And we'll exit that, right? You'll notice nothing really changed, and I'm going to switch this back to a shaded view just to save on some CPU space. But let's go ahead and get rid of that box and make one of our first objects, which I'm thinking is this one. And right off the bat, we can actually make some of these in the view that we see them, right? So for instance, this is kind of our top view, our side view, and then it still needs that front view, or this could be your front or side. Well, if I hold it this way, that makes a little bit more sense, right? This being our top view, our front view, and we actually still need that side view, right? So let's take a look at that object, and I'm just going to kind of ballpark it, right? I mean, it looks like a 2-inch by maybe 1.5 inch tall, more or less, right? So let's go ahead and do that, and I'm going to go ahead and do that in my front view. So I'm going to go ahead and select my line that I selected and hit delete. I'm also going to show some of these icons. Now what's nice about Windows and Macintosh is the icon picture is the exact same, right? So just in case you're kind of looking for it and looking for the right thing, it's essentially this little color wheel, right, is our properties. And this little slice of red, white, and blue pie is our layers, right? So I'm going to go ahead and use like purple, or maybe change that to like an orange. That way you can see it a little bit better on the recording. And it doesn't really matter what color we use, but again, it's kind of personal preference. For myself, I don't see very well, so I definitely like to have bright colors. In our case though, I can draw in 2D and I can draw in 3D. And right now we have 2D, so let's go ahead and draw that 2D, right? We'll see that this view, and unfortunately you won't see me pointing to this in the screen recording, so you might want to pay attention a little bit. All right, basically we're going to draw this view and draw this view, and see if we can actually produce the other one. To be fair, we can use this just like we do drafting. So for instance, if I double click on my front view and I simply try to draw this object, well, I can do that in a multitude of ways. I can just draw some lines, right? Click, and I can type in 2 inches, enter, and you'll see that actually 2 inches is about that big. Oh, there's the boxes, right? Each box, of course, in that grid now stands for an inch, right? Now I'll just make it a little bit easier to see. That way we can see that. And really I'm just drawing this, I don't even know what you'd call that, like a fortune cookie kind of shape, right? So let's draw the rest of it. Sweet. And in my case, I'm going to say that's about 1.5 inches. Nailed it. And in my case, I'm actually holding shift and I accidentally used polyline. Again, not a bad idea because we can use polylines as well. But you'll see we have a multitude of different ways to draw some lines. We got curvilinear blurred lines, we got circles, we got arcs, we got rectangles, we got polygons. So there's definitely quite a bit to get familiar with. However, I don't want to overwhelm you with this program, right? Because it actually is simpler than it looks. It's almost like looking at have you guys ever looked at a pilot cockpit and it looks like kind of crazy, right? But actually most of that is just instrument feedback, right? You don't really actually touch every dial every flight. You know what I'm saying? Just like in architecture and just like this program, we're not going to touch every button, right? There's actually only a few that we actually need. So in our case, we've already used line. Let's use line again. Type in line. I'll click on this point and you'll notice that it kind of locked on to that point. It doesn't do this by default. In fact, let's go ahead and look at it. It's called O-snap, right? And if it's not turned on, well, you'll try to connect all day, but you'll just kind of sit there and be guessing, right? Because it won't lock on to that point. As soon as you use O-snap, however, and type in line, it should snap to this point. However, if you're screen recording like I am on iOS 26, you'll have to save real quick. And let's just go ahead and do that. Put it on the desktop real quick. G1, exercise today. And unfortunately, I have to restart mine real quick. And open it again. Unfortunately, it's just been doing this, especially in my computer graphics class. So let's try and type in line again. And as you see now, it suddenly locks on. It suddenly works again. You won't have this issue or this bug. However, let's continue and draw that line from one spot to another. In our case, I want to draw the line 1.5 inches. Enter. Voila, right? One thing that we can do, especially if I know I need one on the other side, is, well, you'll see that when you have O-snap, you can actually select a number of points, right? Maybe I want to connect to an endpoint, or maybe I want to connect to a point, or a midpoint, or a center point, or an intersection. And of course, all these little dials actually mean something, right? Near is just dangerous, don't ever click it, right? Because it's very easy to just click anything. But as you can see, it has vertex, knots, quads, tangents, perpendiculars, and obviously a lot of language that refers to geometry, right? Everybody essentially knows what a midpoint is. But essentially what I'm doing right here is just drafting, right? And I'll show you what it looks like in 3D. But one thing I could do is just mirror it. So I can type in mirror. I can select the midpoint. I can basically tell it where I want the mirror to be. Gosh, I wish I had this on a drafting table, by the way.
Ortho.
To turn off the ortho, it's right here at the bottom. You'll see that there's an ortho button.
Yeah, I see it.
You can also hit Command F8.
That's
F8. It's a button. Function 8. But yeah, let's draw the rest. Let's get let's fake it till we make it. I'm looking, it looks like, yeah, I'll fake it, right? So in my case, I may want to draw a line just as if I was drafting, right? I mean, how else would I maybe make that line? Well, I'm just going to use my O snap and basically make that shape and get rid of what I don't need. If it was a little too much, I could take both lines, right? And you'll see that there's secretly a point in there, even though you can't see it. It won't let me get it. See if I can, there we go. But we can change that as well. You'll notice that there's this magical thing on here. Every time I select something, you see a green axis, a red axis, a blue axis, and all those things. I don't know why it's called this, but it's called gumball for some reason. So at the bottom, you'll see that there's actually a gumball button, in parentheses, C-plane. It's not exactly important today, but you'll definitely want to make sure you click that, because if it's not clicked, well, you can't really do anything to it, at least in a very easy UI way, right? However, once that is clicked, it comes right up, and we can instantly rotate things, we can instantly move things, and that's actually pretty nice and helpful, right? But again, essentially what I'm doing here is just drafting in this viewport, right? Let's get our next viewport. All right, so let's take a look at it. All right, there it is. Side view and all the perspective views. Well, we need the rest of it. And to be fair, I can tell that this object itself is not exactly complex, and it actually just extrudes a thickness, right? I just need a thickness to it. So in my case, I'll take the whole thing, and I want to join them because, well, right now, they're just kind of separate lines, right? I can click on each one, and they're all separate. So quite intuitively, I just want to type in join, enter, and when I click on it, the whole thing is together, right? You'll see there's those points I was looking for, right? And of course, I can move those points as necessary, right, to maybe dial in the object. So again, just like a piano, just like any musical instrument, guys, nobody just like opens up the piano and like suddenly knows how to play Mary Had a Little Lamb, right? Unless you can really be intuitive and you can play by ear, right? And kind of hear the notes that you're hearing and getting that instant feedback in order to be a musician. This is the exact same thing. You do have to practice, and to be honest, you can't even mess up in this program. Why? Because, well, I can do Command Z or Control Z, and I can go all the way back if I wanted to, right? I can't even mess up in this program, and to be fair, I can even get it all back and do redo line. In my case, I could use the command as well and get that all back, right? So you can't even mess up in this program. Again, something I really wish the drafting table had, right? Can you imagine if you could like edit, undo, and the line would go away? Anyway, how interesting it might be one day. However, for us, we know that this object has a thickness, so let's go ahead and match that. You know, here's our top view. Here's that front view. And you'll see that so far we don't really have a side view yet. Again, that is also what's missing in our diagram, right? But we're kind of building it from the views itself, right? So we've joined this object, or sorry, I needed to go back one more. So join it, right? The next thing to write down is extrude curve, right? So I'll type in extrude, and you'll see there's actually quite a few extrudes. But in our case, we'll do extrude curve, enter. And we'll say, well, how big do you want it? In our case, it looks about an inch. So I'll type in an inch. I can literally type in 1 inch, or since I'm in the units of inches, I can just type in 1. Not a big deal. And, oh, well, that matches our view. That matches our view. And what do you know? There's the view that I need. Now, to be fair, it's showing us kind of a wireframe view, right? By default, it does show us wireframe. So this would actually be a hidden line in there, right? I mean, most of us could probably even turn this around and go, wait a minute, I don't see that line on this side, right? So what we can do is, of course, change that to shaded. There it goes. Lo and behold, I just gave you the answer to this part. It's just a rectangle, right? But really what's important here is that you begin to see it. And in a computer program, notice how we're seeing every single view simultaneously, right? It's a game changer, right? So again, we really just did the exact same thing that we would be doing drafting, and we extruded it, right, to say the very least. From here, though, we can do a couple of special things. So not much to show here, but if I wanted to actually make that flat, keep in mind what I'm looking at right here is actually a digital model, right? You can kind of start to see the line in there. Again, the projector is not the best tool. Usually the screen recording comes out a little bit easier to see. But we can switch it to a shaded view, and we could really start to see this object. One thing that we can do is we can select the object, and as long as we're in this blue viewport, you'll see that when I click on a viewport, it enacts the symbol itself. You guys see that? It's kind of changing each time I click anywhere in the viewport. Now when I do that and I select the object, lo and behold, the next thing to write down is make 2D. Enter. And we do have a couple of options here. It says the view that I want to show. Okay, I want to see the top view. I want to maintain source layers. That's a given. And I want to show the hidden lines because I might have some stuff that's going to get hidden, right? I'm going to press apply, and it's going to magically make the two-dimensional line for me. In fact, it'll even flatten it and put it on the ground. You guys see that? That's my top view. In fact, I can even type in text. I can call it top view, or just top for today. Oh my gosh, that's a big tab. Anyway, so luckily I have Gumball, and I can instantly just make that a little bit smaller. Using, again, I'd play around with these. Some of them control the movement, some of them control the proportions. If I hold shift, it maintains the proportional relationship. So again, that's pretty nice. And one of the best things that a computer does is actually the ability to copy, right? So in my case, maybe I want to copy that. Copy. I'll take it down, double click, and type in front. Not too bad. Well, how do I get that front view? Anybody guess? How would I get that front view? Make 2D, right? And just grab it, make sure I'm in the viewport, type in make 2D. There it is. I could take all of it and move it up a little bit, especially if it's in the way. But I want to rebuild that last move, right? I want to get that side view. So again, let's make 2D. Let's definitely make sure our hidden lines are there. We'll hit OK. And there it is, right there. And it even gets that little hidden line for us, even though it is at a microscopic hidden line. In fact, you'll see that it actually makes its own layer called hidden layers. Right? So I can turn those off, and you can definitely tell that they're hidden, right? Or should be a dashed line, right? There you go. There's the answer to the entire thing. We can make the object, and we can go back and forth between the objects, right? I can, again, even take this object, extrude, an inch, rotate it by holding shift. It'll be a perfect 90 degrees. And I can literally remake the object again, right? Proving that these two objects are congruent. They literally, of course, come from each other. Now that's a pretty easy object. What if we need to go the other way around, right? Let's try and just kind of think about the object for a second. And mostly because I want to show you some other tools. This one already has all the views. Wonderful, right? And to be fair, I think the best way to do this is actually going to just be to draw this view, this front view. So let's go ahead and make that one next. Especially since we have about 8 minutes, right? So let's go over some more steps. I'm going to put this off to the side. And let's make another one. Now, you'll see that it doesn't really move out of the way here, so I'm going to move it over there, at least for the sake of tutorial. Right, let's make the next one, which is...
So third box.
This one?
Oh, we're doing.
This one. Right there.
Okay.
That kind of weird one. So what do we do first? Make the front view, right? Or just any of those views, but I think the most information here is definitely in the front view, right? So let's draw it, fake it till we make it, right? I would obviously measure this and, maybe get the exact lines, and I could definitely do that by going, well, okay, that's exactly 2.5 inches, okay. I'm gonna hold shift and make that straight, click. It's gonna ask me, do I wanna continue? Sure, why not? We'll go up a little bit, and obviously I'm just going to kind of fake it till I make it right. I'm going to use Smart Track, which is basically I hovered at the point that I'm going to end, and I just slide it up, and fake it till I make it. Obviously I want to do that to make it a little bit easier, but again, if I wanted to dial this in, I could definitely take the points and even dial it in. I don't have to erase, I don't have to make a new line or anything like that. I can absolutely manipulate what's already there. Now to be fair, just what we learned in last time, I could just extrude this, right? And I suddenly have the object. Right? These aren't exactly super difficult objects, but again, what's really nice is we can even confirm. Oh, yeah, hey, wait a minute. This one's missing a line, right? You can even start to confirm, well, is this even correct? And I know at least a part of this assignment is actually filling in, especially when you get all three views, actually it's missing some lines, those kinds of things, right? However, it's definitely not a hidden line. I definitely see it, and definitely with the shading, I definitely see it, right? However, another way to make this, right, is, well, what if I only had the top view, or if I only had the side view, those kinds of things? Well, I know that it's basically a rectangle with, some other objects in it. So again, I can make that rectangle in my top view. And I'm just going to kind of fake it till I make it, and use something that is at least relatively close to the same size as that. There it is. It basically has two lines. I've never actually seen somebody put money in it. Totally works. All right.
Sorry.
You're good. Another thing I can do is trim something, right? So you'll see that I just drew a line like that. And, well, man, that's not good. And I definitely don't want to just sit here all day trying to line up things and only to realize, oh man, they're not even really lined up. So don't try to do everything manually. In fact, we can trim something. So I can take everything, trim, enter, and then basically click on the thing that I want to get rid of. Not too shabby, right? I can again copy what this computer does really the best, right? And of course copy it. Now in my case, I'd actually want to line up to these items. So I may actually want these pieces, right? In fact, I may need to even actually produce my own line and get a 45, right? So in my case, I can project these lines as well. And I can simply draft, right? If my computer was working, let's try that again. Okay, there we go. Come on, don't give up on me now. But I can actually do what I would do in drafting, right? Even better, I can use O-snap and be absolutely perfect. If you're a perfectionist like myself, you start to really love computers. In fact, when I was at San Antonio College, we never even touched a computer. It wasn't until Texas Tech that I had to teach myself this program in 2 weeks. That being the case, we never want that to happen to our students because it made me even question whether I should even be in architecture, right? And good thing I made that the right choice, otherwise I wouldn't even be talking to you today, right? However, as you can see, we can use this program literally at the same time of developing 2D and 3-dimensional objects at the exact same time. However, like I said, I do want to show a couple of more tips and tricks. Keep in mind it is recorded, so we can definitely kind of go through, which is kind of applicable to us. Oops, forgot to get those two. Put them up there. But for instance, maybe I didn't know much about this object and I just want to chop it up, right? So I'm going to take this item. I'm going to move this a little bit over here because I can. And we'll get rid of that one. Just in case, well, I don't know, maybe that's all I have, right, of this piece. And maybe I just have the front view like I see here. So I'm going to turn it into a 3-dimensional object first. I'm going to go ahead and extrude curve again. I'm going to give it about 1 inch. And now I actually want to chop away from this item. So I can use something called wire cut, and that's kind of the most advanced I'll give you for today because I do think it's a lot of fun to use. In fact, I'll just draw some lines over this portion right here, my front view. And that looks about the right, I guess it's a little steep. We'll use that one. And more or less that one, right? Just in case I was really just using this in studio and trying to figure some things out. You'll notice my object is over here and my tools or my cut lines that I can use and cross with. Have you guys ever played around with clay back in art school, right? And you got a line and the professor kind of cut the clay, he or she kind of put the string around the clay and then pulled it and it came off, right? Essentially this is what we're doing now in a three-dimensional realm, right? So for instance, it's called wire cut. So I'll type in wire cut, enter to enact the command. And very often you'll see in the command bar that it's actually telling you what it wants, right? So right now it says select cutting curves. Okay, well that's great. That's my cutting curve and that's my cutting curve. I'm gonna hit enter. Now it's gonna say select the objects or the clay that you wanna cut through, in this case here. Hit enter. Now it's gonna be like, well, where do you want it? In my case, my screen is gonna freeze. Let's try that again. And of course my screen, yours will move around. It'll basically ask you like, hey, what do you want to cut? In my case, I want to cut straight through the object, so I'm going to select the X, right? Well, not the X. X is going on that red axis, so I need the green axis, so I'll select the Y. And in my case, you can see kind of what it's supposed to be doing, right? It's supposed to slide straight through. Now, of course, mine doesn't want to work. Let's try it again. And it'll probably work even if I just go that way and of course go that way. And you'll see, yeah, more or less it tried to cut it and it was trying to cut two things at once. So maybe we do one line at a time. Let's try that again. Wire cut this object, go straight through it and go out of it. There it is. Of course, making a separate part, and I can delete that part. Same thing. Wire cut, object, go straight through it and straight out of it, and voila. So again, I do that kind of fast, again, not to scare you, but to show you the kind of steps that you would take in order to practice. Now, I would say 30-minute practice a day makes perfection, but it doesn't. Perfect practice makes perfection, right? So do keep in mind you do want to have some standards, right? But hopefully I've given you actually the front and back, right, if you will. So how to make the object from the view, and well, how to make the object through actually a subtraction method, right? Again, this is the very, very tip of the iceberg. And to be fair, if you want to get more familiar with this program, I would recommend actually going to my D2 videos or my archive videos, right? I would look at the D1 material and the D2 material. To be fair, there's a lot of computer graphic stuff. And I definitely have a lot of videos of just going over it step by step of just different things. However, at least when I teach something, when I was getting familiar with Rhino, there was no other architects on YouTube, right? I often had to look at somebody making Shrek and being like, well, okay, I'll learn how to make Shrek. And it actually taught me a lot of things in the process of how to use this program, how to use, even though I didn't like Shrek music, well, I had to learn the piano playing Shrek music. Does that make sense, guys? Now, the reason I do this is because, well, it's literally your assignment. And what better way to learn about architecture than to actually use the program for exactly what we're doing in class, right? However, before we exit for today, just because we're about at time, what are some of the questions that you may have? And I can definitely demonstrate it. And somebody else may have that exact same question, so don't be afraid to ask it. Plus, what's nice is we can record it for everybody to use. Any questions?
I guess.
Or something that you want me to repeat again? Yes, Maya.
Do you have to use the command like search each time?
To enact a command, yes and no. Like for instance, like if I wanted to copy something, I could, and then if I hit spacebar, it'll basically enact the same command again. So that's kind of nice. I don't have to type copy, 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 copy every time I want to copy. I can just type spacebar and it'll enact the same command over and over again. However, to really answer your question, because I think what you were getting at, is there any way that I can just click on something? Yeah, actually all the icons are commands. Don't get me wrong, I find the command bar to be easier because it's like a search bar, right? Don't get me wrong, there's a lot of icons. All of these icons, and they all are basically commands. You'll see that it even, if you hover over it, it'll even tell you what command that it is. In this case, like we have taper, right? I can click on a certain item, click, it's going to ask for the taper axes. I'm going to go with that, right? And that. And as you can see, I can make some pretty funky objects. But of course, that was just a command, and I didn't even have to type in taper. I just clicked on the taper icon. Definitely great question. Now, obviously, you're not going to do any of that except in maybe my computer graphics class. But we can go ahead and edit, undo, save, right? You can't mess up in this program. What I would say when I was learning this program, I had a lot of fear, right? I'm not doing this right. I'm not doing this right. I need a lot of help. I need a lot of feedback. Sorry, we got to take off the training wheels for a second. You got to go for it. Because again, you can't mess up here. Now, what I would say, like I say in all my classes, is make a big mistake so we can talk about it, so we can fix it, and really address it for the rest of the class, right? So don't be afraid of using this program, right? I know it's daunting at first. I definitely know it. Trust me, I was teaching myself in 2 weeks. However, if you would have asked me when I was learning then, hey, you're going to teach it one day, I'd be like, you're out of your mind, right? And of course, yet now I do, right? Same way when I came to San Antonio College, I couldn't draw, right? Until Professor Escamilla goes, no, you can draw. And I was like, oh shit, I can draw, right? And of course, through practice and reflection, you actually do get better at these things. But very often, I think our generation expects kind of instant results. And this is definitely maybe, what do they call it? The thing that you got to do, right? You know, it's you got to go through it, right? You got to experience. You got to play the instrument. You got to squeak on the clarinet a little bit, and of course, to actually start being able to play better, right? Otherwise, any other questions? Great question, Maya, please.
Without footprints.
So yeah, great question. I've been holding shift. So you'll notice that when you type a line and you click, it is pretty free body. Now, if you do click on grid snap, you'll see that it actually snaps to the grid, which again is great sometimes not so much, right? Now in this project, I'd imagine that's probably great, right? Because it is kind of set to a certain inch scale, right, if you will, right? However, you'll notice in this ortho mode, if I hold shift, it goes, you know, to a perfect 90s, right? If I don't hold shift, it'll stay in that grid view, right? And I can unclick grid snap while in a command as well, right? Again, if I hold shift, it'll stay in a straight path. If I don't hold shift, it'll be more free body.
Yeah, if you want to lock in the ortho, right, you can either do the F8 command there,
True.
or down here at the bottom where it says ortho.
Yeah, so there's actually, what's even funnier is, like, to answer even more of Maya's question, is there's an icon, there's a command, and there's usually actually some sort of button at the bottom or toggle, right, for most of these commands as well. To be fair, it's a little bit overkill on Rhino's part. However, you have to keep in mind, this program actually comes from the invention of, well, in the 1960s, these programs or licenses or the computers themselves would literally be hundreds of thousands of dollars. Nobody can afford that, right? It wasn't until about 1985 that they go, oh, you know what? Instead of $20,000 a program, what if we made it for $100? What if we made it for just $1,000? So this program is actually all code, and what you're looking at is really the visualization of coding, right? But essentially, all this program really knows is you actually see some of that code at the bottom, right? It's just telling you the x-axis, y-axis, and you'll see that right now my axis for z, well, sorry, it's right there, 0, right? But actually, as I move around, you know, it's really just a coding program being revisualized. Great questions, though. Any others, guys? Pretty intuitive? How many of you feel a little bit more confident? Just real quick, how many of you feel a little bit more confident about drawing these shapes now? Good. Hopefully so. Obviously, you have the video to fall back on. And to be fair, I am not a YouTuber in any sense. And there's a lot more information, especially architecture information when it comes to learning Rhino, I would often type in Rhino basics for architecture in your YouTube channel and take a Saturday morning to knock some things out. Pause the video, kind of do what they did, unpause the video, knowing very well that their video is not an assignment, right? You're not going to have to turn it in. There's no stress or pressure in that regard, right? Good questions, though. No others?
We gotta get back in here, right? Go out to class.
We could.
We probably can, but just if Brad is willing to. I mean, this is, it, I understood it completely.
Right.
Only because I have that AutoCAD background. And those commands, like he was telling me, are all the same. Snaps, all that stuff. You just gotta play with it.
I was going to say the vocabulary can be off-putting at first because don't get me wrong, lines are called curves in this program, and you're like, wait, I thought curves were called curves and lines cannot be curves.
Yeah.
Well, you're right. In geometry, that is very true. In Rhino, it's called curves. Like, it's just what it is.
It's weird.
Just like, funny enough, it'll give you an icon of a fried egg and it'll call it bake. And I'm like, I do not know who made this program, but they can't even like follow their own intuition there. Again, I didn't write this program, but it's just the way that it's used. What is nice though is that all the other programs, guess who they followed when they started making theirs? They all used Rhino, right? Even AutoCAD is a lot like Rhino. So if you've ever used AutoCAD, you'll have absolutely no problem, right?
So how do they access this?
These computers
So you
right
guys
here?
have to work here, right? Basically.
Absolutely. And to be fair, this is one of those that honestly you can work together, right?
So what I'm gonna do is probably select, or maybe you select